Well, some brand new reports on the Barcelona attack say that the CIA warned local police of a potential terror attack 2 months ago.
Yeah, so were these warnings followed? Were they not? Could they have prevented this? Let's ask former CIA covert operations officer and the president of Diligence LLC. That's a global intelligence and security firm, Mike Baker. Mike, thanks so much for coming on early this morning.
Sure.
A warning about Las Ramblas. I mean, this is a large street where a lot of people are going to gather no matter really what you do. Could this have been, prevented?
Well, assessments and warnings analysis that's shared between the CIA and our liaison partners, as you referred to with the warnings about Spain and specifically the Ramblas area, typically they are fairly general because, I mean, unless we've got the specific operational leads and intel. So, people shouldn't be under the impression that somehow the CIA a couple of months ago said, you will have an attack here, in Las Ramblas, and it will be, through a vehicle, and it will involve the following, potential individuals. It's more along the lines of general concern, general warnings over what we're seeing elsewhere. Lots of bits and pieces of intel coming in, and you're making essentially your best guess, your best estimate as to where a problem could be. And obviously, the warning was in a sense saying you've got some, likely areas that could be targeted, and we're concerned about, as an example, Las Ramblas, which is very similar to, as an example, the promenade in Nice, where we had 86 people killed last year. So, these warnings, they tend to fly back and forth between the various intel services. Could it have been prevented? No, there weren't sufficient operational leads at the time. And, the only way you would have prevented this, basically, is if somebody close to the terrorists, family members in particular, had seen something or heard something, became concerned, and for whatever their motivation, they would pick up the phone or go see the local authorities and advise them that there may be a problem.
Mike, it seems that every time we have these terrorist attacks lately, there's news that follows that these suspects were on the radar somewhere, somehow. And I was on the air yesterday when this initially broke. And it was within, I think, 15 minutes that there was a report that came out from local media over there that said that one of the suspects they were looking for was possibly from North Africa, and that turns out to be true today. So someone knew something.
Well, yeah, depending on at what point they picked up on that information related to the Moroccan, it may have simply been that they'd gotten some operational leads from the incident itself. But you're right. I mean, following some of these incidents, the public hears these things and they imagine, well, how could you not have stopped this? This person came across your radar. And they imagine it to be a little bit like a feature film or a beach book where, we're able to conduct, or the services are able to conduct 24/7 surveillance ad infinitum off into the future. And that's not the case, in part because you don't have the resources, but in large part because the laws on the books in that particular jurisdiction, whether it's the EU or the U.S., they don't allow for that. If here in the U.S., an example, somebody comes across our radar, well, that's great. But if you don't have enough information that meets that bar that has been set, to say you can continue or open a file and continue the investigation or mount surveillance or get a warrant, then you can't keep that going.
Like the oldest Sarnayan brother.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So if that point in time is not sufficient information, what are you going to do? You're going to break the laws and say, I'm going to continue to monitor that person. That's what people expect, but they also want civil liberties. They want privacy rights. So
is there a way to tell people, to inspire people to be more vigilant, especially, I mean, obviously there were people, I mean, this was, like we were just saying, this was a rather large cell. They all had friends. They all had family. I think it's going to come out, that somebody knew something here and then they just didn't say anything because they were worried about, whatever. How do you get people to just say, hey, when you know something, when you think you know something, you got to tell somebody? Do we need a better hotline? Do we need some kind of, what can inspire people to really prevent these things from happening?
Well, you're asking the million-dollar question there. That's what here in the U.S. is an example. You know, the local and state and federal authorities spend a great deal of time on. It doesn't get a lot of play because it happens off the radar screen, but they work very hard with the local communities here in the U.S. trying to inspire, try to create communication. Because again, if you talk to anybody in the FBI or talk to others involved in counterterrorism here in the U.S., they will tell you that if you're talking about a small cell, you know, essentially a gathering of individuals sympathetic to the cause, to the extremist cause, or you're talking about a lone wolf, as an example, the only way really to get ahead of that, to have a potential to disrupt and prevent what they may be planning, is if one of their relatives, somebody close to them, is willing to pick up that phone because they have sufficient trust in the authorities, or there has been that communication and they're willing to essentially drop a dime on that person. Without that, you're very hard-pressed to prevent and you know, disrupt these operations. You're never going to get it down to zero, but what you've identified, this ability to get them to call and report on somebody close to them, you can imagine that's a heavy, heavy lift. But that's something that they work on here all the time, and frankly the EU works on. They're behind the curve to some degree because open borders there have created a much larger potential pool of sympathizers and supporters for the extremist, the jihadist cause.
Yeah, and then that brings up the whole other issue of cooperation and sharing information between different intelligence agencies in different countries.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's absolutely true.
All right, Mike, thanks so much for coming on.
We're miles ahead of where we were. The good news is, you know, back at 9/11, obviously, it was much talked about afterwards, the lack of ability to share information. We are miles ahead of that point, but it's a human endeavor. It's never going to be perfect, unfortunately.
Yeah,
that's very true. Mike, thanks so much for coming on this morning. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure.